Christine Lagarde, welcome.
Thank you.
How can Greece cut its way to growth?
Greece has a few things to do. Quite a few things to do, actually. The first thing that needs to be achieved, which is of paramount importance from our perspective, is that it has to have the support of the largest possible number of people, both at governmental level, at parliamentary level, and in society as well. Because clearly the path on which the country is engaging is going to be a difficult one that will require resilience, determination, some sacrifices along the way, and a clear focus on growth, on trying to create value, on trying to improve competitiveness. So the first thing, the first condition is broad political and community support, if you will, so that the program that is currently considered by the country is something that belongs to the country and that will help it improving its economic situation. Second, there will clearly be a whole range of reforms that needs to be adopted. Reforms of the labour market, reforms of the product and service markets, all of those with a view to achieving more flexibility, agility, the ability to respond to market demands so that the country can actually be competitive and generate growth and create jobs. Now, that also, third condition that is also required, that the Greek authorities are very careful with public finances in the country. The country has been running very high deficits for many years. It is currently financing a debt that represents roughly 160% of its GDP, and it has to restore a more healthy path for both deficit and debt. So it's all these conditions that are needed for Greece to actually get back on track and become a country that can actually generate its own growth, create its own jobs, and be off the European support that is so badly needed at the moment.
You're going to cut the Greek minimum wage by 22%, and then when people leave their collective agreements, they'll be forced back onto that minimum wage. That will cut demand and that will cut tax receipts. So where will growth in the Greek economy come from?
You know, based on the review and the work that we have done on the Greek economy, there is a lot of room for additional tax collection, and that's an understatement. Second, if you look at the minimum wage, for instance, which is one of the conditions that was put in the programme, the minimum wage of Greece is currently about 50% higher than that of Portugal, 17% higher than that of Spain, and a multiple of the minimum wage applicable in countries like Croatia, for instance. So a lot had been done in the last few years to increase those numbers. Now, clearly the country has to get back on a pace that is sustainable in the long term. Clearly, growth is not going to come out of those changes in minimum wage, because there will be less consumption, there will be less tax collection on that particular aspect of the market. But it's a necessary step to actually improve the competitiveness of the country. And we believe that the reforms that are structural reforms for the country will be conducive to growth. And that is a parallel path that has to be taken together with the fiscal consolidation that I was alluding to and the market reform that is needed in the labour market.
Greek politicians can pass these laws, but when people actually see what's going to happen, when the minimum wage falls by 580 euros a month and people see cuts in health and in education, surely that will cause great social dislocation. Don't you fear that?
That was my point to begin with. It will be necessary for the country to actually understand that the sacrifices that are expected now are necessary to actually bring the country back to a sustainable path and to, restore a situation where it can actually be self-sustainable and generate its own growth. It is a difficult path, no question about it. But don't forget what I just mentioned. The current minimum wage in Greece is 50% higher than in Portugal, 17% higher than in Spain. So, there have been public policies in the past that have been quite complacent when it came to setting certain wages ranges. And clearly the progressions that we have seen over the last few years in the range of about 60% have not been particularly sensible to make sure that the country could remain competitive.
But don't you fear that you might actually see a revolution in a place like Greece because of the harshness of this?
Look, this is a debate that has been going on for 2 years in Greece, and the country has been supported by its European partners, by the IMF as well, with a view to restoring its public finances and make sure that the country is sustainable and can pursue its path towards an improvement of the situation. And it was important that the Parliament could adopt at a very strong majority the program that is underway. It was important to have the political support by the key political Greek parties so that there is the buy-in, there is the ownership that is required for the program to work. It is difficult, there is no question about it. It's ambitious, but at the same time it requires sacrifices on the part of the people that want their country to work, that want their country to be competitive, that want their economy to create jobs. It's both. It cannot be ambitious without having an element of sacrifices about it and an element of significant reforms that actually change the culture.
If Greece had a sovereign currency, then it could devalue. Wouldn't that be a much better shock absorber, and it wouldn't have to go through this kind of harsh dislocation?
I don't think that you can necessarily associate, no sort of currency devaluation with necessary dislocation. We have seen cases, for instance, in Ireland or in Latvia, where the programs have been equally demanding and requiring sacrifices and major reforms, where we haven't seen dislocation and where there has been strong buy-in and success. If you look at the case of Latvia, for instance. So, true, when you are in a monetary zone, as Ireland is, as Greece is, as Portugal is, you can actually improve competitiveness and sort of devalue in a way by operating on the labour cost, because you cannot use the currency lever.
Ms Lagarde, what would be the real dangers if the euro should shatter, and was that one of your great concerns in all of this?
No, we're not considering the fact that the euro could break into pieces. The Eurozone is a consistent monetary zone with a strong currency. If you look at the relative value of the euro compared with, say, the dollar, for instance, it is a strong monetary zone. It is one that is in the process of being improved significantly, because when it was set up 10 years ago, it did not have all the attributes, all the components and all the disciplinary rules that are helpful to keep a monetary zone together, strong and going. But in our assessment and review of the situation, the Eurozone is solid, and as I said, its construction and its reinforcement is clearly in process.
2011 turned out to be a very difficult year. Was that because of a failure of economics or a failure of political will?
2011 was a tough year, no doubt about it. 2009 was a very tough year. And what we saw in 2011, particularly the second half of 2011, was a crisis of confidence concerning particularly the sovereign debt and the ability of economies to recover from the financial crisis that affected pretty much the whole world in 2009. Now, it seems that at the moment, given the measures that have been taken, particularly by the European members of the Eurozone, in terms of discipline, in terms of collective fiscal behavior, in terms of renewed focus on growth, it seems that the sovereign crisis of confidence is abating a little bit. Now it's going to be really a question for those economies to focus on managing a combination of fiscal consolidation at their respective pace and focus on growth, so that growth can kickstart yet again.
But are you concerned about the gridlock that we see in the United States Congress and the failure of political will that we see so often in Europe? Isn't there a political issue at the heart of all of this?
There are always political issues. Let's face it, the world is about a combination of economic issues, creation of value, creation of jobs, expansion of the pie, if you will, and political decisions that have to do with how to manage it, how to allocate it. And the two processes operate in close synchronization and affect each other.
Australia has much better economic fundamentals than many countries around the world, and yet we've seen the second contest for the Prime Ministership in 18 months. Are there lessons that Australia needs to learn about keeping its political house in order?
I think it's a blessing that Australia is enjoying such a strong set of economic data and numbers. When I look at the unemployment rate, half of that in Europe, for instance. When I look at the potential for growth and the growth forecast for 2012, double that of many other advanced economies, I think that Australia has the huge benefit of a very strong economic base.
Do you think that the IMF needs more money in order to do the work that it does?
Well, I think the IMF does its work as well as it can, thank you very much. And we have hundreds of economists and a lot of people that are hardly dedicated to improving the international monetary system, surveying and making sure that countries are on the right track, providing advice and support and technical assistance, and eventually lending money. Now, when it comes to lending, we have been very active lately. I'm sure that we will continue to be active. And if the firewall or the appropriate level of risk contagion limits are put in place in other parts of the world, and IMF additional funding is not necessary, we can do without it. But equally, if the protections and the anti-contagion devices are not sufficient, then clearly the IMF should be doing its job, and if more is needed, then you can count on me to say so. But I'm very appreciative of the Australian authorities' support in what the IMF is trying to do.
And finally, Ms. Lagarde, are you optimistic about the future?
I'm desperately optimistic about the future, yes.
Christine Lagarde, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.